Thanks everyone for coming. I expected to be nobody here for this one because it's the end of the day. So I'm grateful for you being here. I'm Rais. I'm the CEO of Enthea. I do reimbursements for psychedelic therapy. And I am here to tell you about the journey I've been on transitioning from a nonprofit to a public benefit corporation. Hold on. And also, because I want to have fun, I'm also able to answer any questions people might have about psychedelic-assisted therapy, since people may have questions. And yeah, I've been spending a lot of time learning about this. So I'll start off with my company, Enthea. So it was started in 2020 as a nonprofit. The idea was to make psychedelic therapy accessible and safe for anyone that can benefit from it. I come from a long history of nonprofit work. I worked for the UN and World Bank for 10 years. I did poverty reduction for over a decade, worked mostly in Africa and the Middle East, really saw the effects of the mental health crisis and just how bad it is globally and here, and started looking for solutions and saw the potential of psychedelic-assisted therapy, which, again, happy to talk about. So set this up as a nonprofit because that's all I knew. I didn't know about shareholders or equity or cap tables. None of this made any sense to me, and the idea of starting a for-profit company also didn't ever cross my mind. And then there's a typo. It should say the year 2022, not 202, which would be interesting if we went back in time. But 2 years into the nonprofit, I realized that I wasn't going to be able to scale or raise the funding I needed to get this solution to as many people as possible as a nonprofit. So I switched to a public benefit corporation, and I'll talk about what that means. But to give you like an idea of comparison, in the 2 years that I had this entity as a nonprofit, I got $1.5 million in donations, and I was probably spending 75% of my time as a nonprofit co-founder just fundraising. And I wasn't even able to focus on the work that needed to be done or operations or helping people. I was literally always just begging people for money. When I restructured as a public benefit corporation, it took me 6 months to get $3.3 million, and I probably spent 25% of my time doing that. So I was really also able to work on the business. Just as a reference point, in case people don't know, like what are nonprofits to begin with? We probably can think of a lot of nonprofits like World Vision and Oxfam, Mayo Clinic, but really it's an organization dedicated to furthering a social cause, advocating for a shared point of view, something that's in the interest of social welfare or community. That's kind of what a nonprofit stands for, and a key part of nonprofits is that there are no returns. There are no shareholders, nobody's getting money back from it. Whatever money is made gets reinvested into the organization itself. It doesn't mean that salaries are not paid, just to be clear. The benefits of a nonprofit, you have a lot of public trust because there aren't shareholders, because equity isn't being given out, because money is put back into the organization if money is made. You do definitely have a lot of trust from the people. Also depends how you run your nonprofit, but in general, that's the case. There's a huge mission-driven focus. There are many, many, many long list of tax exemptions, and you have access to some different pools of funding, like grants, government grants, donors, just different pools of funding, so that's really great. But challenges are you also have funding limitations. You can really only get money from grants and donations. There's a lot of operational constraints because you're spending so much time fundraising, and that will hinder your scalability in some cases and long-term growth. In some cases, you have organizations like World Vision who have been able to do this at scale, but it's few and far between the amount of nonprofits that are actually able to scale even when they have really great causes, because we live in a world where people want returns. So what's a great solution if you have this sort of mission-driven purpose or passion? You want to do something really good, but you also want to be able to scale. So you can set up a public benefit corporation. By definition, it's a for-profit corporate entity that includes positive impact on society as its goal. And the idea of a public benefit corporation is that its responsibility is first to the public and then to shareholders. So everything that they have to do is to benefit the public first and then the shareholders. It's really a balancing act because you have to balance this pursuit of profit with the need to consider corporate impact on society and the environment at the same time. Those words sound like great on a screen, but to achieve it in real life is really, really hard to do. Because a lot of times those things will be in conflict. Like what will give your shareholders the most amount of returns is not necessarily what's best for the public. So you have to kind of figure out how to balance that. As such, PBCs operate under different legal and transparency and accountability structures to stakeholders and to usually the state where they are registered. So it's a profit-driven entity, but socially responsible. Before I keep going, does anyone here belong to a PBC? Just so no. Yeah? Okay, kind of. Does anyone work for a nonprofit? Yeah. Okay. Okay. It feels like it. Okay. Okay. Helpful. So, the pros and cons of PBC. I sort of talked about the cons, but with this structure, the con is you have to meet both shareholder expectations and social objectives, and that's really complex because you have so much accountability and so much you need to do for your shareholders, and at the same time, you're always in the back of your mind thinking, okay, but I also have to do what's best for the public. But pros, you have access to capital markets, you can have access to a lot more funding you couldn't have had access to as a nonprofit. It feels good. I don't know, me personally coming from nonprofit world, I had this stigma in my mind about a for-profit entity, and this is my personal values getting in the mix, but this feels like a happy medium. I feel good when I go to sleep at night, knowing that I'm working on something that's helping people and making my investors hopefully wealthy one day. So how do you do this? How do you actually transition from one to the other? I summarized it in 4 steps, but it's really not easy. You really have to spend some time strategic planning, sort of going within if you're the founder and thinking about what's important to you mission-wise, what are your values, how involved do you want your stakeholders to be, is there a world where this organization can exist and can be profitable and can still help people. Really be honest with yourself if that's even possible. And then there's a huge legal component. You should have very good lawyers. I'm sure there's good lawyers at this conference. If you are going to make that transition from a nonprofit to a public benefit corporation, because you have to make sure that there's transparency in asset transfer, there's a lot of regulatory compliance, you need to look at your liabilities and make sure those are carrying over if you have any in the right way. So just make sure your books are properly done and lawyers can help navigate that. Integrity is another tough one. It's really easy, and I know some people that now have public benefit corporations. It's really easy to say that you are staying aligned with your mission. Easy to say that out loud, but hard to live it in your actions and in the way you carry the business. And so I think just being mindful of what do you stand for? Why are you doing this? Can you maintain the same integrity that you did as a nonprofit and carry that into this for-profit space? And then financial strategies. When you're a nonprofit, you're not thinking of the bottom line, you're not thinking of returns, you're just thinking of whatever your mission is. So there's this shift in mindset, and you're gonna have to have new, a pro forma and profit and loss and all of these financial things that unless you're a large nonprofit, you're not thinking about, that you need to start thinking about differently, your revenue streams and that of the to make sure that your shareholders are, I guess, happy. There we go. Okay, so once you've made the decision to do this and you've done the legal stuff and checked with your mission and taken the financial steps needed to transition your nonprofit to a for-profit company, It's time for the fun stuff, which is marketing your spinoff. And I'm calling it a spinoff because it kind of is. It's a spinoff organization from your original nonprofit. And this is like super fun. I find, generally I don't like marketing. Sorry if there's marketing people in the audience or listening. But this to me is a lot of fun because you have this ability to like tell the world like, hey, like there's this organization that has this and this at its core, and these are the values, and this is at the heart, and now we're gonna make it potentially even better and even bigger and be able to scale it and be able to perhaps even go global or expand geographically because we've made this decision. And you can control the narrative and be strategic with your messaging, do it in a positive way, of course, and at the core, stick to your mission statement. There's also really important, and I'll be like very, I don't know where this recording is going, but I'll be really open about a lesson learned for me or a mistake I made in this transition was stakeholder engagement. So I like went to the world and I was, because it's psychedelics, it's like a buzz topic. So I got featured in like New York Times and Rolling Stone and Wall Street Journal, and I got all of this press about what my company was doing, but I had sort of forgotten to tell all of my initial donors in the nonprofit that I was doing this spin-off, and so that's a faux pas on my behalf, on my side, and I recommend you don't do that. Like, make sure you tell everyone that was involved in your nonprofit that, like, hey, these are the reasons we need to go the for-profit route. Yeah, do that before you do all of the press and stuff. And then I think it's like anything. I put storytelling here. I have an allergic reaction to that word. Even though it's like an important one, I would say just be organic. I don't know how much you guys can tell from just me being like here, but I'm very organic in the way I carry myself and authentic in everything I do, and so I think that's important too. Like, yes, you need to tell a story, but also it's not a made-up story. Just try to explain what happened. And then going forward with your spinoff, it's great to like report on impact, because the whole idea of going from a nonprofit to a for-profit is, to a public benefit corporation specifically, is you're trying to maximize your impact. So then if at quarterly periods you can report on what impact you're having, it shows that, okay, like I did it on the first slide, 1.5 million in 2 years to 3 million in 6 months. Like already I was able to achieve something, and we had, I'll tell you more about what I do in a second, but we help people with psychedelic therapy. We had 20 covered lives as a nonprofit, and now we have thousands of covered lives. So reporting on that impact is really important. Oh, perfect, case study. Okay, so to tell you a little bit about specifically Enthea, which is the company I started, we started as a nonprofit in 2020. The idea is to give people access to psychedelic-assisted therapy. In the US and in the world, but I'll stick to the US, there's a huge mental health crisis. 25% of people, adults at any given point, are suffering from like a severe mental illness. I was at lunch with someone that's in the audience today. We were talking about this, and the person beside me like said, oh, one of my 4 kids has a severe mental illness, so like there's your 25%. And in your lifetime, 1 in 2 people will have some sort of severe mental health issue, like in lifetime prevalence. So there's definitely a challenge. And without like making things too heavy or too triggering, like I'm sure people even over here have known people that have dealt with something, or you yourself have dealt with something, or someone you love or care about. And so most of the ways we are treating mental health aren't necessarily working. So Enthea was created to like give people access to innovative treatments that actually work, that show that after a year of treatment, like you will no longer need to be on antidepressants, you will no longer need to do talk therapy, and you will actually be cured. So that's what we're in the business of doing. As a nonprofit, we were able to reach very few people. I had to keep begging people to donate so that I could achieve this mission. And as a for-profit, we garnered a lot of interest. We have some of the biggest banks in America, some of the biggest tech companies in America. I'm going to Silicon Valley next week to talk to all the major tech companies about offering this, and everyone's excited about something that can help their employees be more productive and be more present at work and be more engaged. So that's like, I don't have a lot of time, so that's a little bit about this kind of case study of like how much more efficient it's been in terms of impact being set up as a public benefit corporation. And fortunately, I've found investors who are mission aligned. So I didn't take money from just anyone out there offering it, but I really spent time vetting my investors to make sure they actually care about the mission. Best practices in navigating this transition. I think I've covered all of these things, but transparency, really talking to your stakeholders, embracing change. I haven't talked enough about this, but when you're transitioning from a nonprofit to public benefit corporation, there is a lot of change. Like even in my employees, they were coming to work every day sort of like, not saying all nonprofits are like this, but they were like, you know, it's fun to have this like remote job, and well, I'll work when I want to. And like things really changed when we started having investors, and I had to like do investor reports every quarter, and there needed to be like a lot of progress. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to do another raise. So now I like love my employees and treat them well, but also hold them accountable, and they all have KPIs and things that they need to get done every month. So just like embracing that kind of change rather than being resistant to it. And yeah, being adaptable, having room for feedback. I'm trying to go fast, leave room for questions, but I will end with a wonderful quote, which is, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. Does anyone have any questions about anything I've talked about or psychedelics? Yes.
How were you convinced that the psychedelic product would help with mental illness, that you became convinced that you would go this direction?
Yeah.
And what about your liability going forward? Do you have a big insurance plan or something?
Yeah, we're well insured with liability insurance, but as a benefit plan provider, the liability won't really fall on us. It'll fall on the provider of the actual therapy, and we're just the benefits administrator. But how was I convinced? In a nutshell, antidepressants work well for 15% of the people that take them. So 85% of the people that take them, not that it doesn't work at all, but it doesn't cure them, or doesn't, like, they don't feel like they're having a greater than 50% reduction in symptoms. And with psychedelic-assisted therapy, with anywhere from 1 to 4 sessions, the data tells us that 60 to 80% of people are completely cured at 1 year follow-up. They're no longer having to take psychedelics, they're no longer on antidepressants, they're no longer doing talk therapy, and at 1 year follow-up, they no longer present the signs of PTSD or depression or anxiety or whatever they initially did the therapy for. And I follow data, and so the data tells a good story. Yeah. Anyone else?
Could you kind of define psychedelic therapy a little bit? Like, what are you guys using?
Yeah.
Everyone tripping on mushrooms or
Yeah.
LSD, or what are we doing here?
Yeah. Okay, so the word psychedelic means mind manifesting. It was coined by a British-Canadian psychologist. So mind manifesting is what the word means. There are many psychedelics, some we are aware of and have been using for millennia in almost every region of the world, and some that are newer, and some that we have not even discovered yet because there are many psychoactive plants that we haven't really looked at yet. But essentially what I'm talking about is the classic psychedelics are LSD, so acid, MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy, psilocybin, which is also known as magic mushrooms, and ketamine, which is an anesthetic that we've been using for 60 years and is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines. Here are some common psychedelics. Again, there are many more: ayahuasca, peyote, toad, the list goes on and on. Of those that I just mentioned, MDMA is closest to, ketamine is already FDA approved and legal nationwide. MDMA is closest to FDA approval in the US. It just got submitted for approval in December. It should probably be approved in September of this year. And there's a lot of clinical research on it. That's why it got submitted for approval. And psilocybin from magic mushrooms will probably be submitted to FDA for approval next year, and there's already a lot of data. And how it works is psychedelic-assisted therapy is you meet with your therapist before you do any drugs. You prep, so you talk to your therapist about your intentions and why you're there. You are then administered your psychedelic in a very high dose. This is not like microdosing or whatever people sort of talk about online. It's a very, very high dose. You're in an extremely altered state. Unlike antidepressants and SSRIs, psychedelics will increase the neuroplasticity in your brain. It's the only substance that we've seen. I wish I had my image of like the brain on psychedelics, but you can Google the brain on psychedelics and see the image, but nothing else has this effect in terms of increasing connections in the brain. And while you're in this altered state, which on ketamine only lasts an hour, but on MDMA and mushrooms will last 6 to 8 hours, you have a therapist beside you, and you're open, and you're vulnerable, and you have less inhibitions, and you're able to reprocess any trauma you've been to and get to the root cause of whatever initially caused this trauma or depression and talk it out with your therapist. And then once that session is over, you do what's called an integration, which is having a few sessions talking to your therapist without the drug, but to sort of integrate and like seal the neural changes in the brain. So those pathways kind of become sealed. And why this is so effective is because of that neuroplasticity. Even things like substance abuse, like there's a great study with mushrooms where 80% of people who were chain smokers, smoking like a pack of cigarettes for 10 years or more, did one session of psilocybin-assisted therapy, and they stopped smoking like cold turkey because it's that powerful in the brain. So does that help answer your question? Okay.
I imagine this could be very valuable for veterans.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what it's like if you have experience trying to approach the government with this. Has that been a fruitful experience, a difficult experience, given how the government looks at drugs?
So actually, the reason why a huge reason why we are where we are today with the advancement of psychedelic-assisted therapy. These drugs were, by the way, around in the 60s. There's tons of clinical data from the 60s. There was so much research happening. And then, Nixon, war on drugs happened, and everything got rescheduled. And the reason now we're doing studies again and we have all this data is actually because of our vets. And they have severe PTSD. The rate of suicide is extremely high, extreme addiction issues. And it's a lot in part due to bipartisan support of helping vets, that there's bipartisan support of studying psychedelics. And for example, just a quick one, there was an event last year with Rick Perry from Texas, who's generally very conservative, but really cares about vets, so thus is very pro-psychedelic assisted therapy. This has been a great avenue, and the VA is already administering ketamine-assisted therapy and including that in their offering for vets.
All the time we have. Thank you very much.